we're still on off-campus accommodation. Hope you're still with us. Off-campus accommodation we're going to be chatting a little bit more about. As I showed you in the Kijiji demonstration, I said you can contact the landlord and you can write them a message, right? But I want to give you a little example of what that message might look like, or some tips in terms of how to communicate with them best. I won't talk about this in great detail because our next webinar is all about communicating with landlords, and we'll go into that with a little bit more detail, the different modes, in person, over the telephone, via email, but right now we'll give you a little bit of a snapshot of what the next webinar is going to be about. So it's important to be polite in your note to the landlord. It's important to be clear and to really express your interest in the unit. Okay, so here is an example. I'll just read this out to you. So, hello, my name is Janelle, and I'm very interested in this apartment. I am a mature, responsible student, and I'll be studying at Conestoga College in downtown Kitchener this January. Can you please provide me more information about the unit? So what you'll see here is listed a couple of things that the student might want to know that weren't originally listed in the ad when they read it. So date available, length of lease, rental cost and payment options, number of roommates, or any other questions that you might want to ask. Okay, and then at the bottom, this is very important, is to include your contact information so that they can get back to you because you want to hear from them. So you can say, I can be reached at insert email address and contact information, so email and telephone number if you'd like. And then you end with thanking them. So thank you for your consideration, and I hope to hear from you soon. So good communication is incredibly valuable. When you're polite, respectful, straight to the point, and you present yourself well, even through an email, it is the best first impression you can make. And as most people say, you can't make a second first impression.
Okay, so now we're moving on to, well, we're still going to be on off-campus accommodation, so hopefully you're still understanding where we're at with that. And we're going to talk about questions for the landlord. Now, when I first was going about looking for an apartment to rent, I can't say that I had all the right questions off the top of my head, but I did refine it as I went along with the process. I learned what questions I should be asking them, and so hopefully I can communicate some of that to you. So some of the important ones that you might want to ask are, how many people reside in this place? That's a big one because you want to know who you're living with, how many people can be in that apartment unit itself. And it's also, just before we get into it as well, you should have a clipboard maybe with a sheet of paper on it, something that you can write these questions down so you can keep track of this whole process. You also want to follow up on what utilities are included in that rent. So, is it heat, water, electricity? Is that all included with the cost of rent, or are you going to be expected to pay a little bit extra for that? Another big important one, we've talked a little about it in the process so far, is room sharing permitted? So if that means you have a friend that wants to come stay with you and split that cost, is the landlord going to be okay with that? Again, as Abney said, you don't want any surprises with that with your landlord, so it's best to ask that question before getting too far down this process. Another one is, what is the minimum length of a lease? So that's an important one because you want to know what's the minimum number of time that you can that you're going to be signing on and committing to staying in this place. So if you're satisfied with that, if you go through and you ask all these different questions and you're satisfied with the answers that your landlord gives you, communicate to them. Let them know that you're serious. As Janelle said she was serious about running that place, about buying that place. So communicate that with your landlord, and that could definitely help in how they perceive you as a viable tenant. Okay, moving along, still on off-campus accommodation, we're going to talk a little bit about preparing your application. So most places you go to, your landlord is probably going to want you as a potential tenant to fill out an application. Now, what that entails is really going to differ depending on who your landlord is and what they want from you. It can be a really extensive process, or it could really be the bare minimum. But I would generally say, come prepared to provide the following things. So you want to be able to provide references. So that could be anything from family members talking about how lovely you are, to previous employees who are saying, oh, he or she is such a hardworking person. Landlords love to see that. It tells about your character, and again, that's a big part of this. Showing who you are to your landlord can be pretty influential. you want to come with proof of your student status. So again, that's showing a little bit about who you are. It also ensures that there's a time commitment there because they know you're studying in the region. So coming with an enrollment letter is pretty standard, and landlords typically like to see that. Another thing is financial information. So this is just to give your landlord a little bit of peace of mind that yes, you have the ability to pay for significant parts of the time that you're going to be there as a tenant. So that usually comes in the form of a proof of your account balances, something like that, just so you can quickly show them and say, hey, I am a viable option for you. And last but not least, contact information for a guarantor. And if you don't know what a guarantor is somebody that can sign on a lease with you, and basically it's just ensuring to the landlord that in case you as the tenant aren't able to pay rent for whatever reason, or there's damages that you can't cover, that this other person will cover that for you. Now it's important to note that if you don't have a guarantor, it's not the end of the world. Just come ready to provide evidence for things like financial security or your intent to stay in Canada for a period of time. You can also provide something like a history of being a dependable person. So again, that's where reaching out to past employers can come in handy. Okay, so in summary, we talked about a lot of things, but the first one is, again, you're going to find that rental unit, you're going to contact the landlord. We talked about what services, Kijiji, there's a whole list of sites. We have some databases from our office available for you. And then how to contact the landlord. Be clear, tell a little bit about who you are, be confident. Then you're going to present yourself as the idea tenant to the landlord. You're going to go and meet with them, and you're going to ask those questions that we detailed before. So come prepared with questions. That's usually the best thing. You don't want to miss anything speaking on the spot. That's definitely happened to me in the past. Then you're going to complete an application if required, and it's important to keep track of them because oftentimes you're dealing with multiple applications because, again, you want to find space, so you're putting out a lot of applications. And again, so be prepared with those key things that are often required for the application process. Now, if you're approved, and we'll talk about payment in the next slide, if you're approved, you're going to provide payment, but keep a copy of that signed lease with you. And bear in mind that it's different, again, per each landlord what's customary. So sometimes the decision process for them, sometimes takes longer than with others. So maybe have a conversation prior, just establishing when they plan to make a decision so that you're ready and prepared for the whole process.
Just going back to keeping track of all your applications, we really want to encourage you to be polite and respectful to landlords, not just when you're applying, but throughout the process. So for example, if you've applied to 5 places, you're obviously not going to sign on to 5 places, but you still want to communicate your decisions to the landlords who you are not going with in a polite and respectful manner. This will allow them to free up the unit for other students. And it's all about creating that international student reputation in the community. We want them to know that at every step of the way, we're communicating openly, honestly, and providing a good reputation for each other and our students.